Chapter 86. What do you mean the cafeteria's open? While they were playing Legends of the Three Kingdoms, next door, a bunch of players were also sitting down to try out Fall Guys on the Expo demo stations. Even though a round of Fall Guys normally needs 60 players to start, Lucas had prepared a QR code that let people download Fall Guys directly onto their phones. While playing on a touchscreen wasn't quite as satisfying as using a keyboard and mouse, it still gave a fun experience, no doubt about that. And later, when the official version is released, cross-platform support will be added too. PC and mobile players will be able to choose whether or not to enable crossplay. If you don't enable it, you'll only be matched with others on the same platform. On top of that, Fall Guys is the kind of game where you can jump in and out freely. Once you're eliminated, if you don't feel like watching the rest, you can immediately leave and join a new match. This quick cycle meant that even during a busy expo, players only had to wait a little before joining a new round. There was never a shortage of players. And compared to the Legends of the Three Kingdoms booths, Fall Guys clearly drew more attention and had a livelier crowd. Not because it had more cute girls playing, but because from a viewer's point of view, Fall Guys is just easier to get into. With Legends of the Three Kingdoms, you have to watch for a bit before even starting to understand the basics, like the general skills or the effects of certain cards. Even though Legends of the Three Kingdoms is very straightforward, you can figure it out after playing a round or two, or even just watching a couple matches. It clearly doesn't have the same appeal as Fall Guys. Obstacle course-type games like this are pretty familiar to most people. Even if they haven't played one, they've probably seen or heard about them. The controls are super simple. Just dodge traps and try to reach the finish line before the timer runs out or other players beat you to it. A bunch of colorful jellybean-like characters all scrambling together, it's pure comedy. Of course, beyond those reasons, there was another key factor. Lucas actually stepped up and acted as the live commentator. He gave a play-by-play of the Fall Guys matches right on the spot. That alone pulled in a lot of attention, even from players in other parts of the venue. It drove other developers and designers crazy. Where's the fairness? Where's the justice? While everyone else had showgirls with long legs, Lucas showed up with a bunch of cartoon mascots. It felt more like a zoo party than a game booth. Everyone else had basic demo setups for hands-on testing, but Lucas, he just slapped 2 QR codes on the wall and let players download the full games directly. And judging from how complete the games were, they looked ready to launch. And now he brings them to the expo like it's his own product reveal event. Then the guy goes even further. He's a game designer, yet he jumps in to stir up the crowd, even doing live commentary. Isn't that totally unfair? A bunch of designers and studio heads from nearby booths were getting more and more annoyed as they saw the crowd shrinking on their side. What is this nonsense? Their area looked like a ghost town, while Lucas's side was packed wall to wall. But neither Lucas nor the players cared about those complaints. Legends of the Three Kingdoms, Fall Guys, and Lucas's personal presence all drew tons of attention. Hey bro, why is everyone crowding over at that booth? A few players who had just wandered over from another part of the expo asked curiously. It's Nebula Games' new titles. Same devs who made Outlast and Overcooked. You don't even have to line up, just scan a QR code and start playing, a helpful player explained. No way, that's awesome. What kind of games are they? A random visitor, exhausted after waiting in line for an hour just to get 5 minutes of gameplay, widened his eyes. Look, 2 games, Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys. Just check the big screen, they're showing both right now. Hurry up and get into a match. Lucas is about to commentate the next round. Hope I get in. On the big screen, a green Fall Guy had just won a crown. Lucas kept chatting with the players as he got ready to commentate the next match. Ha, I got in. Me too. Haha, that's me with the burger hat. I'm the pineapple. As the next round began, the players who made it into the game were super hyped. Ben and his group had also managed to get in. It was Ben, Zach, and Hannah playing together. Don't screw me over this time, man, Zach said, eyeing Ben. Clearly still holding a grudge over that whole huge Liang, Liu Bei lightning combo earlier. That was just a one-off, don't worry about it. I swear on my life I'll carry you to the finals this time. Ben thumped his chest confidently. At 63, he looked like he meant it. Meanwhile, Hannah was focused on customizing her Fall Guy to make it look even cuter. Joey didn't join Zach's team this time. She was still testing out the custom room mode and getting a feel for things on her own. As for Wells, he was still playing Legends of the Three Kingdoms with some random players at the expo. He just couldn't let it go. He got knocked out before even playing a single card. Total humiliation. This game's Fall Guy-style controls are kind of wild, Zach said to Ben while they waited for the match to start. They had just tried a short demo round earlier. The basic controls were super simple. Move with the joystick, jump, grab, that's it. Really easy to pick up. But the physics and how the game felt to control, that was a whole different story. The characters wobbled so much when they walked, it looked like they could faceplant at any moment. And the way they moved and jumped felt like a mix of rubber and springs. Stop talking, the game, about to start. This round's gonna knock out over 20 players. Don't tell me you two are gonna get eliminated right away, Hannah said with a dramatic eye roll. The first round was called Gate Rush. There were 7 rows of doors, some real, some fake. Players had to make it through before the cutoff. All 60 players stood in neat rows before the game began. It was quite a sight. All right, the new round, about to begin. The first stage today is randomly selected, and it's Cafeteria Rush. You can see all the players lined up and ready. On stage, Lucas had his mic clipped on and was commentating in a serious tone. The players who were in the match, and the ones just watching, burst out laughing as soon as they heard that. The first part sounded fine, but Cafeteria Rush, what the heck was that? Wasn't the stage called Gate Rush? Everyone had the same confused look on their faces. But pretty soon they got why Lucas called it that. Chapter 87, Who's That Pink Idiot? Once the game officially started, all 60 jellybean-shaped characters sprinted forward like lunatics. Every round had a time or player limit. Anyone who didn't make it to the finish in time would be eliminated. So everyone tried to reach the end as fast as possible. In this stage Gate Rush, the path was lined with rows of doors, some real and some fake. It was basically a luck-based stage. Some players smashed into fake doors, while others found the right ones. Once someone broke through, everyone else would charge toward the open door. Plus, the game had a grab function, which only made things more chaotic. Outside the demo area, a bunch of players watching the livestream were yelling while holding their phones. "Bro, stop pulling me, let go. Who's this pineapple head? You're about to rip my pants off. Why is everyone trying to get through the same door? Move it, let me through already." On screen, a huge pile of colorful Fall Guys were crammed together, all trying to squeeze through one door, scared to fall behind. A lot of players watching couldn't help but think of their own college days. Back in their freshman year, before they figured out tricks like ordering food from back entrances, they all had to go to the cafeteria. Every time the last class ended, swarms of students poured out of every building, all heading to the dining hall. It really did look a lot like this. Whether you made it into the match or were just standing in front of the Nebula Games booth watching, it was nothing but laughs all around. That was hilarious, that hot dog guy just got flung off the stage. This game looks so fun. The physics in Fall Guys makes them bounce around like rubber balls. Yeah, and that wall climbing move is just too funny. I can't take it anymore, I need to try it myself. Let's team up and play together. Teaming up doesn't seem all that useful though, everyone's on their own. It actually helps a bit, later rounds have team matches. And if your friends make it that far, you'll be on the same side. Oh really, that's pretty cool. People around the Nebula Games booth, watching the big screen showing Fall Guys, couldn't resist any longer. Many of them started pulling out their phones to try the game themselves. They were itching to play. Meanwhile, people near other booths also started glancing over curiously because of all the noise. Some even gave up on their own booth's games, found an open spot nearby, and just started playing Fall Guys on their phones. Nebula's booth was simply too packed. This, of course, made staff from other game companies look a bit sour. At the same time, the first round of Fall Guys at the Nebula booth had reached a very intense moment. There were less than 10 spots left, any more eliminations, and people would start getting kicked out. "Zach, go, I'll hold the others back," shouted Ben, who had managed to match into the same round. He looked at the two burger-headed Fall Guys next to him, and the number showing just one qualifying spot left. He made his move. Let go, you're grabbing me, not them," Zach yelled in despair, seeing Ben's hand latch onto his character. That cry drew attention from nearby players, who started watching out of curiosity. Some of them quickly recognized Zach and Ben. After all, not long ago, they'd been over at the Legends of the Three Kingdoms area, where Zach's crazy Zhuge Liang play had left a strong impression. At the same time, Lucas, who was watching the game closely, caught all of this and had it shown live on the big screen. Clearly, what we just witnessed was true brotherly love. With one spot left, the teammate decided to take down the opponent so his friend could cross the finish line. He looked determined, as if to say, "Live on for the both of us." But the sad part is, he grabbed his own teammate. Lucas gave this recap after the round ended, and the results screen revealed who was actually on which team. The crowd burst into laughter. This was a perfect example of that saying, "The only thing worse than a strong enemy is a teammate who acts like a fool." But for some of the players, that moment was a revelation. What just happened gave them new ideas. Maybe Fall Guys could be played with a whole new strategy. Meanwhile, Hannah, who was standing next to Zach and Ben, looked at the two of them speechlessly. "Wow, you two are something else," she was clearly done. Zach didn't say a word, just gave Ben a long, resentful look. "My bad, man," Ben scratched his head and took the blame. As the game moved on, the Nebula booth was filled with groans, screams, and laughter. Even those who couldn't get into a match were still swept up in the excitement and let loose. Normally, people might be too shy to yell in front of a crowd. But when everyone's doing it, it becomes something totally different. Especially once players got into the special stages like Jump Club and Block Party. That's when the noise really ramped up. In those 2 rounds, players had to jump over moving obstacles and dodge a spinning wheel that kept getting faster, all while the safe area kept getting smaller. Naturally, a lot of players got wiped out. Some who figured out little tricks would even try to grab others if they knew they were about to fall themselves. In an instant, Fall Guys turned into a chaos simulator. Awesome. That's crazy. Next to Hannah, Ben and Zach had turned into her personal cheer squad. Right now, Hannah had just barely made it to the final round, a stage called Honeycomb Maze. She couldn't help but feel a little nervous. This round wasn't too hard to understand based on the description. The tiles would disappear after a player stepped on them, making you fall to the layer below. There were 8 layers total, not counting the one where everyone started. If you fell through the 8th layer, you'd land in the slime and get knocked out. So the goal was to stay on the tiles as long as you could. Once everyone else was eliminated, you'd win the game. In simple terms, outlast everyone else and the win is yours. "I can't stay too close to the others or they'll step on my tiles and I'll fall," Hannah summed up. This round was basically proof of that saying, walk the path others take, and you'll end up with nowhere to go. But pretty soon, Hannah discovered a small trick. Walking made the floor vanish too fast. But if she jumped and hung in the air just a bit, wasn't that like turning 1 step into 2? Lucas, who was commentating at the time, noticed this little detail. "Looks like this hot dog Fall Guys is up to no good. Yup, he's moving toward the pineapple Fall Guys. Look at those sneaky little hands. They're grappling with each other, down they go. Both eliminated. Let's check on the others. This pink Fall Guys has a pretty clever idea. She's jumping to slow down her fall, because jumping gives you hang time. It's a slower way to move compared to walking. But it seems like she's not that skilled yet. Oh no, she messed up, face-planted and dropped straight to the bottom layer." Lucas kept commentating. Nearby, Joey, who had just taken off her headset after finishing a match, happened to hear Lucas's commentary. Right as the screen showed a pink little character leaping and totally missing the platform, falling 3 levels in a row into the honey slime, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. Haha, that pink one is such a noob. Who jumps like that? What are you two looking at? Joey froze, seeing Ben staring up at the ceiling and Zach staring at the floor. That pink noob you're laughing at, that was me, Hannah said flatly. Joey. Meanwhile on stage, Lucas didn't plan to keep commentating the whole time. For the first day of the expo, he just wanted to hype things up with the first 2 rounds and get the crowd going. That was more than enough. He handed the mic to the actual host and looked down at the excited players in the audience, a satisfied smile on his face. The way players responded to Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms really impressed him. These 2 games might not be groundbreaking masterpieces, but at the very least, they'd already managed to grab tons of attention. And this was only the beginning of the event. Chapter 88. Don't you Nebula Games people have your own booths? It's safe to say Fall Guys is a seriously addictive game. In Lucas's previous life, it came from a small studio. But within just 1 week of launch, it sold over 2 million copies and passed 10 million in its first month. You could say it was completely over the top. It was definitely a breakout game, even though the hype didn't last long because of the company's own issues. Judging from the game itself, its popularity was almost guaranteed. So what made this game truly special? When it comes to gameplay, aside from Fall Guys, no other game had ever mixed game show-style obstacle courses with video games like this. The lose and leave mechanic let players jump straight into the next match without any wait, which really helped reduce frustration. Before players got bored, the game kept them hooked with tons of fun and varied levels that felt like a collection of mini-games. Of course, once you do get bored, it all starts to feel repetitive. So to keep Fall Guys popular, the best move is to keep adding new maps or special modes to keep things feeling fresh. When the full version of Fall Guys launched, they added not just the creative mode, but also a daily map rotation. That way, players would get a new experience every day, which helped keep things exciting. Visually, the cartoon-style Jellybean characters, their silly movements, and the chaos of 60 players in one match made the game super entertaining. The sound effects were also carefully chosen to add to the fun vibe. It all created a cheerful and light-hearted atmosphere. For many players, their first impression of Fall Guys was simple: it's just fun. Compared to it, Legends of the Three Kingdoms might have deeper gameplay, but in terms of first impressions, Fall Guys was clearly the winner. Pretty soon, a lot of players who tried Fall Guys were completely hooked. Anyone want to team up? Come on, let's go together. This Fall Guys game is so dumb and cute. Yeah, they walk like wobbly little weebles. Hey, who keeps grabbing me? I'm about to get knocked out. Feels like I just can't stop playing, and there are so many levels. At the same time, these players brought Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys over to other booths at the event, and that sparked even more interest. Even though the Nebula Games booth was packed with people, with a live stream and cosplayers dressed as Fall Guys characters to hype things up, the number of games people could actually play there was still limited. But both of these games had mobile versions. Before, people were just wandering around because the lines were too long and boring. But now it was different. Now they had something in their hands to pass the time. Over at the NetDragon booth, codenamed Star God, Marcus and his team were keeping things organized. Looking at the long line of people, he felt nothing but excitement. Based on the feedback from players, Star God still had some rough edges that needed polishing. But overall, the comments were mostly positive. No doubt about it, as a brand new VR blockbuster, NetDragon was clearly the star of this year's gameplay convention. The only slight downside was that Skynova, their rival, also brought a brand new VR game to the show. And based on reports from his team, that game was doing really well too. It was clearly their biggest competitor at this year's event. We need to get a press release out ASAP and get early reviews of the game out there, Marcus said. Also, let's buy some trending spots online and get people talking in the forums. We can even hire a few people to help boost the buzz. He discussed the next steps with the staff beside him. This was the first big project he'd handled since joining NetDragon. Even though he wasn't the only one in charge of the game's entire development. After all, it was a large-scale VR game. The final product and later marketing operations were completely handled by him alone. So he really cared about how well the game would do. If it became a massive hit, then his career would basically skyrocket. At that moment, Marcus's head was full of dreams about a bright future. After giving the staff instructions for the upcoming tasks, Marcus walked toward the long line ahead, planning to check out the area for their game, Star God. Even though the staff had already told him most of the feedback and data, he still wanted to see it with his own eyes. But as he got closer, he noticed something unusual. Wow, what kind of luck does this Shenjai have? 7 Liu Shens and even Zhuge's repeating crossbow. What, 7 straight Liu Shens? That's crazy, absolutely insane. My Liu Shen only ever draws red cards. Damn, who's this pineapple head? Such a jerk, if he can't make it, he's dragging me down with him. Hurry up, hurry, guys, the yellow team just took the lead again. Quick, go steal eggs from their base. Haha, I'm dying, only 3 people made it past this rising tide level, the rest all drowned. What's going on? What are these players even talking about? Marcus stood there, totally confused, listening to them. He understood every word individually, but put together, what were they even saying? There were also some players still waiting in line, looking curious after hearing the others. Bro, what are you guys playing? One confused player asked. Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms, super fun. What's that, a new release? Never heard of it. Many were puzzled, so many people were playing, how had they not heard about it? It's not out yet, these are games Nebula Games brought for this expo, the player replied. What, Nebula Games? The same company that made Outlast and Overcooked. Those 2 games totally drained my last bit of passion and energy. No way I'm touching anything from them again, said one guy, who instantly remembered some bad memories the moment he heard the name Nebula Games. Haha, no, this time it's different. Lucas isn't bluffing this time. These 2 games are actually super fun, and it's super easy, just scan the QR code and download. Wanna try? Just scan mine with your phone and you're good to go. Oh really? Thanks man, I'll download it and check it out, the player perked up. Wait, so I can play without even lining up. After downloading and going through the beginner tutorial, they quickly got hooked on both games. Bro, it's your turn. My turn already, screw it, you go first, I'll get back in line. Damn, why is this jerk dragging me? Some players were already at the front of the line, but couldn't bring themselves to quit their current games since the match wasn't over yet. They glanced at the line and just decided to requeue. Marcus, who saw the whole thing, couldn't believe his eyes. His eyes widened on their own and he was completely stunned. And it wasn't just Marcus. Skynova and a few other game companies were also seeing the same thing. They all watched as players from the Nebula Games booth, with phones in hand, walked over to their booths while still playing Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys. And then those players started infecting the ones waiting in line at the other booths. Before long, everyone was holding their phones, playing Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys. The whole place fell into chaos. What the hell? Nebula Games. These were the 2 new games brought by Lucas. No lineups, just scan a code and play anytime, anywhere. You've gotta be kidding me. Are you seriously trying to cheat? And don't you Nebula Games players have your own booth or what? Chapter 89, The Talk of the Town. After a full day at the expo, Lucas, the Nebula Games staff, the cosplayers, everyone was completely worn out. Mostly because the players were way too excited. Even though both Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys could be downloaded and played on mobile phones as long as you were inside the venue. The huge number of attendees, combined with Nebula Games' themed booth, really fired up the whole atmosphere. The most important part, players just kept coming, one group left and another showed up. The event was set to last 5 days, and even after the buzz of day 1, the heat around Nebula Games' booth never cooled down. In fact, because players who tried Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms on day 1 kept spreading the word. By day 2, day 3, more and more players were rushing to the Nebula Games area. It got to the point where the event organizers had to bring in more security to the 6th hall, where Nebula Games was located, just to keep order. Nebula Games had clearly become the star of the show. Even the long-anticipated VR titles from NetDragon and Skynova started getting overshadowed by the buzz around Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms. There was no helping it. Sure, both VR games were impressive. But the problem was, they were still a long way from release. No matter how big Skynova and NetDragon are, they couldn't go all in on promotion this early. Their booths were just meant to build some early hype. But then this happened. As for why their popularity didn't hold up, the reason was simple. Because players couldn't really try the games. For VR titles, people had to wait in line, and even then, each person only got about 10 minutes to test it out. Basically, just a quick demo, not enough to compete with Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms. Even though those two could only be played inside the venue, players could experience the full game. And both games were just super addictive. So this year's expo had a pretty weird sight. No matter which booth you went to, you'd see people in line holding phones and power banks, playing Fall Guys or Legends of the Three Kingdoms while waiting. At first, major media outlets focused on the VR games from Skynova and NetDragon on day 1. But by day 2, 3, 4, the headlines were all about Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms. The two titles totally blew up and took over the gaming scene. So, in a private group chat for game designers, a bunch of them were talking about Nebula Games and the two titles at this year's Gameplay Expo. Did anyone go to the expo? What's the deal with Lucas, new games? Yeah, if you know, spill. What's up with Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys? One's a strategy card game based on the Three Kingdoms. The other's a cartoony obstacle course game, like a game show. In terms of quality, they're both solid. Legends of the Three Kingdoms is deeper, but Fall Guys is super addictive. That music and those wobbly characters are stuck in my head. Plus one, seriously addictive. The games are popular partly because they're good, but mostly because Lucas totally nailed the marketing. Exactly, if we're talking best marketing at this year's Gameplay Expo, I gotta hand it to Lucas. For real, he thought of everything, show goals, cosplayers and the games themselves. If you ask me, next year mobile games might explode. Lucas played it smart. While everyone else had long lines, his new games could be played anytime, anywhere in the venue. That kind of exposure was wild. Forget next year, you think other devs and studios didn't notice. Lucas was the first to pull this off and got the results. If you try the same thing next year, you'll be too late to the party. All I can say is, Lucas really knew what he was doing this year. Do you think Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys might become the next big trend in casual games, like Overcooked was before? Very likely, players at the expo were acting like they were hooked, and people online are just as hyped. Many game designers with sharp market instincts were suddenly inspired as they watched the rising popularity of Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms online. If these two games really do set off the next wave of casual games, then jumping in early and releasing similar games could definitely earn them a piece of the pie. Sure, the previous wave of copycats after Overcooked didn't really make a big splash. But at least those early games didn't lose money, some even made a small profit. And Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms are totally different from Overcooked anyway. They're not co-op games, which means they can attract a much wider group of players. Also, player expectations online are sky-high right now. A lot of small and mid-sized devs in the industry are running the numbers in their heads. Meanwhile, in all the major gaming forums, people are talking non-stop. I'm telling you, Lucas wasn't lying this time. Fall Guys is insanely fun. I'm at the expo right now, and I seriously can't wait for tomorrow. I'm totally addicted to Legends of the Three Kingdoms. So jealous, once the expo's over, Lucas will probably release both games. From what I've seen online, they look super polished. As the expo went on, the hype around Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms kept growing. More and more gamers were learning about these two new and unique games. Seeing Expo attendees posting videos and showing off their gameplay made others even more eager. Soon enough, tons of people flooded Lucas's official account begging for the games to be released. To be honest, this kind of stuff is usually just players venting. No one really expects a reply. But out of nowhere, on the fourth day of the expo, Lucas actually responded on the official account. With everyone watching and waiting, Lucas simply posted, "Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys will launch early on the Nebula Games platform. Legends of the Three Kingdoms will be free, and Fall Guys will be a one-time purchase for $8. The timing was perfect, right before the end of the Gameplay Expo. It hit just as the hype was peaking. By that point, tons of players were already itching to get their hands on the games after hearing everything from the expo. The moment Lucas dropped the announcement, players already using the Nebula Games platform logged in to buy and download right away. Those who weren't on the platform yet also rushed to get it. All of this, of course, was part of Lucas's plan. He used the heat from the expo to push a scarcity-driven marketing strategy, promoting the Nebula Games platform at the same time. A lot of people complain about this kind of marketing, but there's no denying it works, especially when the hype is this hot. Of course, you can't push it too far. Otherwise, players will feel like they're being strung along, and it'll backfire hard. Chapter 90, going viral. On the day, Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms launched on the Nebula Games platform. Tons of players rushed to download them. Since Legends of the Three Kingdoms was free, there was no reason not to get it. Even though Fall Guys was a paid game, its cute cartoon style and fun gameplay made a lot of people excited for it. And there was one more big reason. During the expo, Fall Guys was available to try for free, just for a day, but still free. Whether it was a good fit or not, players figured they might as well try it out first. If it turned out to be fun, then just buy it, simple as that. Also, based on what happened with Overcooked before, games made by Nebula Games usually get some kind of discount when sold on their own platform. And looking at the level design of Fall Guys, many players have already guessed that this game will most likely support a creative workshop in the future. Compared to Steam in the previous timeline, the creative workshop feature on the Nebula Games platform hasn't made much of a splash in the gaming world yet. That's mainly because it's not just up to the platform, it also needs the participation of both players and game developers. But for players who have experienced the fun of creative workshops, they're really looking forward to it. Right now, Overcooked still reaches up to 100,000 concurrent players at peak times on Nebula Games platform. That's largely thanks to the creative workshop. Even though Overcooked is available on other platforms too, using mods there is a bit more of a hassle. Very soon, the first-day download numbers for both Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms were released. Legends of the Three Kingdoms broke 1.2 million, while Fall Guys hit a massive 3.1 million. This data really shocked many people in the game industry. Even though Legends of the Three Kingdoms is free forever, and Fall Guys was free just for that day, and both were riding the hype from the Gameplay Expo. Even so, those numbers still caught everyone off guard. Especially because all of this was just on the Nebula Games platform. That means the platform gained millions of users overnight. Sure, the actual user engagement may not be that strong, but the numbers alone are crazy impressive. Compared to giants like NetDragon and Skynova, or even the official app stores that already have hundreds of millions of users, or secondary platforms with tens of millions, Nebula Games obviously can't compete at that level. But for an independent platform to pull in this many users, that's insane. And looking at the current data, it's clear that both Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms still have room to grow. They're not done yet. The only question is how far they can go from here. So, the stats from Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys have clearly made a lot of game designers jealous. On industry forums, alongside the optimistic and impressed voices, there were also plenty of skeptical ones. It's still too early to say whether Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms will really succeed, don't you think? Yeah, even though they're popular and being talked about a lot, Legends of the Three Kingdoms is a free-to-play game and depends on in-app purchases, while Fall Guys is only free for a day. We don't know the actual sales yet. Exactly, their success depends on two key numbers: player retention and revenue. Saying they've made it now is kind of premature. Right, if either number flops, both games could crash just as fast. But these kinds of comments weren't the majority. There are always some people who are more excited to see others fail than they are to succeed themselves. Meanwhile, the regular players had a completely different mindset. They just thought both games were fresh and fun. As two of the hottest games at the moment, once Lucas gave the green light, a lot of streamers across different platforms started broadcasting Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms. But Fall Guys basically steamrolled Legends of the Three Kingdoms in terms of popularity. From a player's point of view, the two games are pretty different, and each has its own charm. It's hard to say one is clearly better. But for streamers and content creators, the gap was more obvious. That's because Fall Guys is just way more fun to watch than Legends of the Three Kingdoms. So across all the major streaming sites and video platforms, Fall Guys content was everywhere. And both players and streamers noticed one thing. Playing Fall Guys is just a lot more fun. Sure, the game has some rage-inducing moments too. Like when some troll stretches out their evil little hand and grabs you right at the finish line, just to keep you from making it through, and you end up getting knocked out. In an instant, Fall Guys turned into a full-on chaos simulator. But unlike Overcooked, where it's easy to start yelling at each other, Fall Guys is more about teaming up against everyone else. So sure, it raises your blood pressure. But the mood is completely different, way more fun and lighthearted. This kind of variety show obstacle course game is basically one of a kind right now. It gave players a totally fresh experience. The internet was full of laughter and jokes from players. Most Fall Guys forums and communities were focused on social topics. Mainly people looking for others to play and voice chat with. Because the first impression this game gives is just so fun and silly. Meanwhile, over on the Legends of the Three Kingdoms side, even though it looked like Fall Guys totally overshadowed it in popularity, its community forums were filled with all kinds of strategy guides. Because most people still didn't know how to play, and the game itself had more depth compared to Fall Guys. So things like card effect breakdowns or character skill guides were very popular. Of course, there were also some funny posts too. The game had just launched on the Nebula Games platform. But there were already plenty of unlucky players posting their famous moments. I wanna ask, am I being punished by the system because I didn't buy the Legends of the Three Kingdoms skins? Why can't my Genji see black cards? Why does my Dekairo have no diamonds? That's nothing, I used Zhuge Liang's lightning stargazing skill and zapped myself. Beat that. Please, your characters at least triggered their skills. I played Sun Shangxiang, had 4 female characters on the field, and not once did I draw a weapon card. I basically played a blank slate. Online, whether it was Legends of the Three Kingdoms or Fall Guys, players were chatting non-stop. For a while, the whole player base was just having a good time. On Lucas's official blog, plenty of people also left comments saying they had misjudged him. The Warrior of Love lived up to his name. Even though both games had frustrating and unlucky moments, most of the time they were pure fun. Some players even joked that if Fall Guys had launched back on Valentine's Day, it would have been perfect timing. Chapter 91, the fire has gone out, but the king is nowhere to be seen. Gamers all over the internet were fired up thanks to Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys. At the Gameplay Expo, you could see groups of regular players playing both games together across all the booths. But on the 5th day, the final day of the event, many players and game media outlets noticed something strange. In front of the Nebula Games booth at Hall 6, everyone looked shocked. What the hell, did they change the whole theme? Holy crap, is this a trailer for Lucas's new game? Looks like it's not just Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms anymore. Is this a medieval-style game? That armor and greatsword look sick. Finally, there's a female character, but why are her eyes covered? Over at the Nebula Games booth, all the Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys posters had been replaced. There was a black knight in a pointed iron helmet, chainmail under a black leather vest, a blood-red cape fluttering in the wind, holding a sword and shield, covered in dark armor. A warrior riding an ancient dragon, armed with a dragon-slaying spear, looking like a king. A bulky knight holding a huge saber like Guan Yu's. Another knight with sword and shield, his armor shaped almost like an onion. And finally, a blindfolded woman in a black robe, holding fire in her hands, wearing a white crown that covered her eyes. At the same time, the brightly dressed Fall Guys cosplayers had turned into a group of people in all kinds of armor, holding weapons and shields. If this had been the scene on the first day of the event, it probably wouldn't have drawn much attention from players, because almost everyone was dressed like that. But after 4 days of seeing Fall Guys cosplayers everywhere, players had gotten used to them. Now, with this sudden change, many players became even more curious. Some players who had been at the Nebula Games booth on the first day also remembered something. On that first day, Lucas had told them that there would be a big announcement on the last day. So, did Nebula Games bring a brand new major title? Outside the booth, players formed layer after layer of crowds. At this moment, Lucas finally stepped onto the stage. Looking at the players below, he smiled and said, "I believe many of you have already guessed." Yes, that's right. Today we have another piece of news for you. We've been secretly developing a major title that will be released on PC. Always pushing ourselves to break limits, always exploring every unknown mystery. Now the fire is almost gone, yet no king is in sight. This will be a story about the flame and the ones who carry it. Please look forward to it. As Lucas finished speaking, the crowd erupted into cheers at just the right moment. Even some members of the media who happened to be in Hall 6 were shocked. Nebula Games is making a major title. So this was the real highlight of Nebula Games at the expo. Were Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys just appetizers? Other game designers and companies at the event also looked completely pained. Seriously? This is an expo. An expo, do you know what an expo is supposed to be? Why is it that you, Nebula Games, no you Lucas, always pull stunts like this? This is not supposed to be your personal game launch event. Watching the massive crowd gather, everyone looked frustrated. Even NetDragon and Skynova's key people, who had been keeping a close eye on things, felt the same way. Especially Marcus, he still hadn't recovered from the blow. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It really was. Where did things go wrong? He was supposed to be the one in the spotlight. Whether it was a big title or its promotion, why did the ending turn out differently? But for the regular players, the past 4 days with Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms had already fired them up completely. If Lucas had announced this so-called new game on the first day, people might have just nodded and moved on. But now things were completely different. The applause and cheers were like a tidal wave. On the large LCD screen, which had been prepared in advance, a CG cutscene began playing, something that had been rushed to completion over the past 2 months with countless hours of overtime. Unlike the simple cutscenes in the original Dark Souls, the content hadn't changed much, but the visual quality was on a whole different level. After all, for this one short cutscene, Lucas had hired one of the top CG studios in the country. From the visuals alone, it was obvious that this was AAA-level work. And because of the tight schedule, the CG studio had been working overtime almost every day, not that they were underpaid for it. Just this less than 3-minute CG cutscene had cost almost as much as the entire development budget of Outlast. The screen faded to black, an old woman's voice began to speak. Yes, that is Lothric, the homeland of generations of Lords of Cinder, and the place where all wanderers gather. As the old woman's weathered voice spoke, a ruined and desolate royal city slowly appeared on screen. Though now in decay, you could still faintly feel how grand and prosperous it must have been in its prime. Under the dim light, a bitter cold wind swept up the swirling snow. Grey dust shrouded the vast royal city, and the whole world was silent and lifeless. And so the pilgrims all head north, coming to understand the meaning of the legend. In the heavy snowfall, a group of stooped figures, carrying turtle shell, like burdens bound with chains, leaned on walking sticks as they trudged forward against the biting wind. Thick clothes wrapped their bodies tightly, but the bare arms exposed outside were black and cracked like burnt firewood, with faint spots of orange-red light glowing from within. At last, one pilgrim could go no farther. He collapsed to the ground, unmoving. The fire is fading, yet no king is in sight. A deep drumbeat began to sound, accompanied by the old woman's hoarse narration. It was as if every player watching was drawn into this mysterious world, eager to know what kind of game, what kind of story lay ahead. When the flame of inheritance fades, the bell will ring out, waking the ancient lords of Cinder from their coffins. With the heavy toll of the bell came the sound of violins, and a blend of male and female voices in solemn chant. The scene cut instantly. A massive coffin was pushed open. In a dark, deep underground cavern, countless black, viscous fluids surged and pulsed, and in their midst a crown could faintly be seen. Saint of the Deep, Aldrich, Devourer of Gods. Amid coffins and piles of corpses, a group of armored soldiers holding greatswords slowly rose. Dark red cloaks, stained with blood, fluttered behind them in the wind. Abyss Watchers, the undead legion of Farron. A giant cleaver slammed into the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. From a huge coffin, a massive figure like a small mountain slowly rose. On its armored arm that gripped the blade, cracks ran deep, with heat and flames seeping through. With a thunderous roar, the giant's flames blazed again. The lonely ruler of the profaned capital, Ihorm the Giant. As Ihorm's roar echoed, the chanting of male and female voices reached its peak. With the violins in harmony, every player could feel something truly epic. The next moment, all sound cut off. The screen went dark and the world fell silent. The old woman's voice returned. In truth, kings will one day abandon their thrones, and the Ashen Ones will come in droves. They are nameless, unfit to be kindling, and cursed to be undead. A pair of pale hands appeared on screen, slowly placing a blindfold, like a liquid black substance flowing from a candle, over their face. Then the camera pulled back as the woman slowly stood. With silver-white hair, a black robe, and a tall, graceful figure, she looked like a saint. And so the Ashen Ones yearned so deeply for the flame. In the dark, the fire still burned. The blindfolded woman turned, carrying a body in her arms, and walked forward slowly. Finally, the screen faded to black. The game's title appeared in the center, Dark Souls. Below it in small, almost unnoticeable text, release date undecided. End of the chapter, chapter 92, already done, still doing it. The trailer wasn't long. Just a simple CG cutscene. It didn't show a single bit about the actual gameplay or content. But it still got all the players really excited. First, it was the sudden surprise. Second, it was because the trailer looked absolutely amazing. Just by watching it, everyone could tell that Nebula Games really went all out. With a trailer like that, paired with what Lucas said about it being a major PC title, it was completely convincing. Would they make such a high-quality trailer if it wasn't a big game? As the trailer ended, the crowd broke into loud cheers and applause. That was insane. I didn't expect this year's expo to have such a big surprise. I can't believe Lucas was waiting here all along. This must be his first major title. That was intense. When that Eldritch God Eater showed up, along with the Farron Undead Squad and Ihorm the Giant, and the music kicked in, I got goosebumps. I'm gonna be thinking about this all year. I seriously can't wait to play this game. +1, since they made the announcement and even showed a trailer, the game must be nearly done, right? Definitely, it probably won't be long before it's out. The Farron Undead Squad and Ihorm the Giant must be bosses in the game, right? Just thinking about going head-to-head with them for 100 rounds sounds amazing. The whole crowd was buzzing with excitement, and the noise started drawing in people from nearby booths too. When those players found out Nebula Games had dropped a huge announcement like this, they got fired up too. They started shouting from the crowd, asking Lucas to play the trailer again. At the same time, Nebula Games' booth became completely packed, and the event staff could barely keep things under control. Even Hector and some of the male staff from other companies jumped in to help keep order. There was no other way. It was like a street performance. Once a crowd forms, more and more people gather. This kind of herd mentality is common at big events like this. A bunch of players also started yelling questions at Lucas, who had just stepped off the stage. "Lucas, when is Dark Souls coming out? Can you tell us what kind of game it is? Is the new game related to the Warrior of Love?" The players were super excited, though of course, some took the chance to mess around. It was fine to ask about the game, but why bring up the Warrior of Love? Still, once one person mentioned it, others jumped on the bandwagon, and soon that question was being yelled out too. Lucas couldn't just ignore them, so he started answering the questions one by one. With a smile, he looked at the crowd and nodded slightly. "When will it come out? That depends on how fast our team can develop it. This is our first time making a big game at Nebula Games, and besides the technical stuff, we still have a lot of challenges to deal with. But what I can tell you is that the game is already in development. We want to make a perfect game for everyone, so I can't give you a set release date. After all, no one remembers the games that came out on time if they were trash." The crowd smiled at that. Behind the booth, Hector, Rachel, Anna, and the other team members quietly lowered their heads. Yeah, the progress was actually going pretty well. The game was already being worked on. When has your Lucas ever lied to you? The folder was made 2 months ago. Back at the booth, Lucas kept answering questions. As for what kind of game Dark Souls is in broad terms, it's an ARPG, but compared to the ARPGs currently on the market, it's totally different. It's a brand new kind of ARPG. And as for whether this game has anything to do with love, well, I've said this more than once. Every game I make is full of my love for the players. As for whether the game itself has that so-called love element, I'd say it does. A lot of you probably felt that from the trailer. The world of Dark Souls is just like the name suggests, it's filled with a sense of despair. And in that despair, players will take on the role of the firebearer, someone who brings fire to the world. The crowd couldn't be more hyped. But this time at the gameplay convention, the fun of Fall Guys and the highly playable Legends of the Three Kingdoms really made a strong impression. At the same time, many players at the event were already mentally prepared. They knew that Dark Souls might have a pretty harsh story. After all, a world full of despair, with a flame carrying hope, plus the previous games like Outlast and Overcooked had already worn them out. And while Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys seemed to bring Lucas back to that warm and lovable Warrior of Love image, it was clear just from the name that Dark Souls was not going to be a cheerful, happy story. The bleak and worn-down style was already obvious in the trailer. So many of Lucas's loyal fans were already prepared. So what if it's a bit tragic? No big deal. They'd already been heartbroken playing to the moon, after all. So, just like in the first 4 days of the gameplay showcase, most players were drawn in by Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms. On this final day, though, all eyes were on Dark Souls by Nebula Games. Everyone was talking about this game, and just 2 hours after the trailer was shown at the event, it was uploaded to both Lucas's and Nebula Games' official accounts, sparking a wave of discussion among players. You could say the biggest winner of this year's gameplay event was Nebula Games. Even though their booth wasn't the biggest, and their game wasn't the most ambitious in terms of scale, they still managed to steal all the attention. Lucas didn't know how things went for the other developers and studios. But at least for Nebula Games, this event was a total success. The next day, inside the Nebula Games office, the employees who had joined the event still hadn't calmed down. They were full of excitement, chatting about all the fun stuff from the convention. "This year's showcase was really something," Rachel said, still buzzing from it all. Anna nodded, "Yeah, and just thinking about how both Skynova and NetDragon showed off their VR games, but in the end we stole the spotlight. I can't help but laugh. But Boss Lucas, our game, hasn't even officially started development yet," said Hector, scratching his head as he looked at Lucas. He'd been thinking about that ever since they got back from the event. Even though the trailer was out, it had mostly been handled by just a few of them, and the trailer itself was outsourced. As for the game, they'd only put together some early concept art. Hearing this, Rachel, Anna, and the other core team members all looked toward Lucas. Online, players were buzzing with all kinds of speculation. Some overly optimistic fans even thought that Dark Souls might get actual gameplay footage in just over a month. But the team knew better. It wasn't that simple. they knew the truth. They had literally only created a folder for the game so far. "No rush," Lucas said. "At the convention, I never gave a release date. I just said it was in development. If players ask how it's going, we'll just say we're working on it." And for a game like this, especially something this big, even if it's a PC game and not a VR one, the development cycle won't be short. Plus, we don't even have experience in this type of project yet. Once I finish the full concept and design plan, I'll go over it with all of you. For now, just follow the 2 directions I gave earlier. Start designing the art assets and work on implementing the game's movement systems. Even though it's an ARPG, action elements are really important in this one. And on the business side, we also need to keep pushing Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys. Those 2 games are still very important for the Nebula Games platform, Lucas reminded them. End of the chapter, Chapter 93, the plan for Dark Souls. Lucas didn't choose Dark Souls randomly, or to be exact. The 3rd and final entry in the Dark Souls series, he thought it through very carefully. In his past life, Dark Souls had grown into a huge franchise. From the first game to the 3rd and final installment of the Age of Fire saga. It told players a grand, epic story about the Age of Fire. Of the 3 games, the 1st and 3rd stood out the most in players' minds. Mainly because the 2nd game wasn't directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki himself, and many fans had issues with it. Dark Souls II was criticized for relying too much on enemy swarms to create difficulty. That's why it didn't become as well known or loved as the 1st and 3rd games. As for why Lucas chose to develop Dark Souls III, the reason is very simple. By the time of Dark Souls III, the core ideas behind the Souls games had already matured. Take Demon's Souls, the first game in the series. Many players think it's harder than Dark Souls III, while others find it easier. But the difficulty in Demon's Souls doesn't really come from the boss fights, it's more about the punishing design and cruel map layouts. Dark Souls, on the other hand, is a more standard level-based game. Some even call it a memorization game. Compared to the first game, many players feel that Dark Souls III is a bit easier, and they're not wrong. Dark Souls III is actually the most beginner-friendly Souls game. If we were to rank all of Hidetaka Miyazaki's Souls titles, excluding Dark Souls II, which he didn't personally direct, and Demon's Souls, which was his first try and still rough around the edges, then yes, Dark Souls III is the easiest among Dark Souls I, Sekiro, Bloodborne and Elden Ring. And don't argue if you want to argue, take it up with Miyazaki himself. He said this in an interview with Famitsu when talking about Elden Ring. Unlike the first Dark Souls, where you could end up running into high-level zones from the starting area with no idea what you're doing, Dark Souls III is much more thoughtfully paced. The game follows a learn, test, pass, repeat cycle, making the difficulty curve smooth and manageable. That's also why Dark Souls III became the best-selling game in the series. Of course, Dark Souls I shares some of Demon's Souls' brutal difficulty. After all, both were early titles in the genre. But there's a key difference. Due to limited budget and content during development, Dark Souls I used a clever trick. It borrowed ideas from Metroid and Castlevania, Symphony of the Night in its map design, and introduced a loop-based structure like a Möbius strip. This actually became a major highlight of the series and was kept in future games. If we're talking about breakthroughs in Miyazaki's games, unlike how Zelda, Ocarina of Time set the standard for 3D games, Souls games didn't really redefine the genre in that way. Because none of these mechanics were completely original. Rolling, parrying, backstabs, grappling hooks, blocking, fragmented storytelling, map design, none of them were invented by the Souls series. What makes it special is how it puts all of those parts together to create something with a truly unique style. The idea that Souls games are hard is just a surface-level label. If you think Souls game equals hard, then you're completely missing the point. That's also why, when thinking about how much players in this parallel world can handle difficulty-wise, Lucas chose Dark Souls III as the next game to develop. Another reason is that level-based games are a bit easier to develop compared to open-ended ones. And since this game is supposed to help promote the Nebula Games platform, its shareability is an important factor. Souls games, with their unique charm, are a great fit for that goal. After all, the streaming industry in this world is just as developed as in the original timeline. A game like Dark Souls gets a huge popularity boost through live streams. Back then, Dark Souls III and Sekiro became super popular in the earth, and that success was closely tied to streaming and video platforms. As for the story, that's really not a big issue, since Souls games focus more on level design than narrative. Still, fragmented storytelling is a major feature of the series. Unless you're a genius, there's no way you're going to fully understand the story on your first playthrough. At most, you'll have a rough idea of what's going on. A lot of the story isn't directly told, it's hidden in item descriptions, side areas, and bits of dialogue. You have to piece it together yourself. That's what gives the Souls series its charm. Every player has their own interpretation. Each person has their own unique take on the Dark Souls story. Because so much of the lore and world building is scattered across the game, in bits and pieces, you really have to dig deep to understand the overall plot. That's why over time, fans have kept researching the story and created the whole Soul Scholar meme. Since Dark Souls III tells the story of the end of the Age of Fire, it can easily be told in reverse. Just sprinkle in a few callbacks and hidden references in the game to hint at a future prequel. That's all it takes. So, in the Nebula Games office, Lucas Hart leaned back in his chair with his eyes closed, thinking about the future direction of Dark Souls. As for the initial design concepts for the gameplay, Lucas wasn't in a rush. Even if he pushed himself to get it done now, the project would still need a bit of prep time before development could really begin. Before that, he figured he'd use the points he had saved up since Overcooked released before the new year to try his luck with a big draw, maybe level up some of his abilities, and hopefully score a few good items. Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys, on the other hand, hadn't earned him many points yet. That's because those two games only officially launched after the Gameplay Expo ended. So they hadn't racked up much in terms of points yet. After organizing his thoughts on where to take Dark Souls, Lucas opened his browser and the backend of the Nebula Games platform to check up on how Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms were doing. Dark Souls, being Nebula Games' first AAA title, was more of a long-term project. Even though players were already hyped, all he could really do for now was keep telling them it was in progress. In the meantime, Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys were the real backbone of Nebula Games. And it wasn't just Lucas. Plenty of game designers across the industry were keeping a close eye on Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys. After all, both games stood out big time during the Gameplay Expo. A lot of devs and studios were very interested in how these two games would perform once they were officially released. A game getting attention isn't enough on its own. Real success is all about revenue and sales. That's what decides whether a game makes it or flops. Before Dark Souls, I'm planning to write a small-budget game to bridge the timeline. Keywords: 3 guys, 1 girl, 1 dog. What could it be? Take a guess. Chapter 94. Isn't this just nesting dolls? After the official release of Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys, the numbers for both games kept rising steadily. Fall Guys, in particular, being a buy-to-play game, spread like wildfire. On major video sites, streaming platforms, and in player communities, the name Fall Guys blew up. Even people who hadn't played the game had heard about it from all sorts of places. That shows just how popular it had become. It even led to collaborations with characters from other games. Tons of fan-made content popped up, turning iconic characters from other titles into Fall Guys versions. All of this gave a huge boost to the game's promotion. And the real credit goes to the game's bright and appealing art style, cute character design, and fun, casual gameplay. Of course, on the forums, some players joked that once you play Fall Guys, you become a total sweatlord. But for most people, it was clearly a game packed with fun. Even the media jumped on the hype, with all kinds of reports covering Fall Guys. In comparison, Legends of the Three Kingdoms didn't explode the same way, but its performance was very steady. On the forums, players were discussing which generals made the best teammates, and which ones were widely seen as dead weight. Before long, the data for both games came out. Fall Guys sold 650,000 copies in 3 days. Legends of the Three Kingdoms pulled in $15 in revenue over the same time. These numbers shocked everyone in the industry who had been keeping an eye on both games. People weren't too surprised by Legends of the Three Kingdoms. The real shock was Fall Guys' sales. It was insane. But what came next was even crazier. The stats for Legends of the Three Kingdoms stayed steady, no major jumps, but also no real drops. But on the 4th day after Fall Guys launched on third-party platforms beyond Nebula Games, total sales shot past 1 million. And from the looks of it, the momentum wasn't slowing down at all. That number completely shocked industry insiders. No one had expected a game like this to hit 1 million copies in just 4 days. Sure, it helped that Fall Guys had a very low price, but still. 1 million sold in 4 days. Even if it only cost $1, that's still crazy impressive from any angle. After the sales numbers dropped, people in the industry started buzzing. Did you see that? Fall Guys just blew up. 1 million in 4 days, I'm speechless. How is that even possible? And the crazy part is that player reviews are actually really positive too. Don't just look at Fall Guys. Has no one noticed Legends of the Three Kingdoms is doing something unique too? Even though the revenue isn't huge, look at how it's run. No forced spending, not even any subtle nudges towards spending, and it still pulled in nearly $27 in 4 days. Legends of the Three Kingdoms looks simple, but copying it is tough. Let's hurry up and study Fall Guys instead. Combine it with some popular obstacle course variety shows and see if we can ride this wave. While you're all still talking, the smart designers are already moving. Countless game designers rushed to analyze Fall Guys, hopping to cash in before the hype died down. Meanwhile, on the player side, the spotlight had shifted to another big reveal at the gameplay showcase. On the final day, a teaser trailer by Lucas dropped, alongside a hint from the official account about a game called Dark Souls. Players on various forums were already deep into speculation. Dark Souls is the name of Lucas's new game, so it's a fantasy setting. Totally looks like Western fantasy, and judging by the trailer, it's clearly a big-budget project. The fire is dying, but no sign of the king remains. The story of the firebearer sounds pretty dark. Sounds cool though, so we're playing as the firebearer, carrying the last hope in a hopeless world. Man, I want to play this already. Time to carry the flame. Hey, did you see the concept art shown at the event? So badass. Are those the playable classes, or maybe bosses we'll fight? I can't wait. After the official account posted the trailer, Lucas's fans jumped into discussion. Some had seen it all live at the event, others were catching up through social media or news reports. Everyone was excited and couldn't stop talking about it. As for Lucas, he had other plans. He was ready to use his saved-up points. Since the new year, he'd collected enough for a 100-roll draw. And now that he was starting development on Dark Souls, it was the perfect time to upgrade some key stats. Lucas sat down at his computer and first changed his desktop background to a big red Lux symbol. Then he opened his music app and played the alternate universe version of Good Luck's Coming. The lyrics and tune were different, but the vibe was what mattered. Once everything was set, he tore open a pack of wet wipes to clean his hands, took a deep breath, and started the draw. Whoa, Golden Legend! As golden light flashed across the screen, Lucas imagined the matching voice lines in his head. Too bad the results were painfully real. Common, common, common. After about 10 straight commons, finally a rare showed up. Along with those came a bunch of memory capsules. Whoa, Golden Legend! Lucas's face lit up a bit. This time, even if the voice line was just in his head, the item was real. As the golden light flashed again, a golden item appeared on screen. Mystery Gacha. Once you meet the unlock conditions, you'll receive a mysterious item. A golden glowing egg. Lucas also noticed that there were several progress bars on the egg. Each one labeled joy, sadness, resentment, and anger, 4 different categories. So I got a gacha item. That's another gacha item. Lucas was speechless. Isn't this just nesting dolls? He pulled a gacha, and what he got was another gacha that needed a key to open. Still, Lucas started to feel a bit curious about it. Given how high the requirements were, and the fact that it was gold tier, it probably wasn't just some ordinary thing, right? While thinking this, Lucas also used the skill books he had drawn to boost his stats a bit. For Joey, Fall Guys had just launched recently and could still provide plenty of points. As for resentment and anger, once Dark Souls was released, Lucas figured those wouldn't be too hard to collect either. Thinking about it like that, the conditions actually seemed pretty easy to meet. And the best part, this thing didn't interfere with his points, it was a separate system. After spending all his saved points, Lucas did a bit of research before turning his focus back to Dark Souls. Up next, he still needed to grind out the game's concept draft. Begging for those rec and monthly votes Chapter 95, if you don't give players an immersive experience, are you even human? Let's set aside the story background for now and just focus on gameplay. Whether it's stat upgrades, gear, or the combat system with rolls, parries, backstabs, and other mechanics. Honestly, in other action or RPG games, none of that is new. But the biggest thing that Dark Souls did differently was combine those existing elements with level design and boss battles to create a clear, level-driven experience. Everything was built around pushing the player to keep going, defeat tough enemies, and get that sense of accomplishment and pride. With help from the memory capsule, the draft took Lucas more than a full day to finish. And it still wasn't the full version. It only covered the core mechanics. Broader things like the full story weren't included at all. After all, this was just a first draft. Some details still needed refining before he could move on. Everyone had arrived early in the meeting room, sitting in their seats and chatting quietly. But as soon as Lucas opened the door, the room went silent. I'm sure most of you already have a guess about what today's meeting is about. Yes, it's a new game. No need for small talk, let's jump right into it. This time we're working on a Western fantasy story. The art style will be quite different from what we've done so far. The game will have a realistic art direction with a dark, heavy tone. It'll be based on Western European architecture. In the game, players will explore different regions: Fort Farron, Undead Town, Frost Valley, and more. These places will show off different cultural elements, like Baroque architecture or Roman-style cathedrals. Lucas placed both hands on the table, as a projector behind him showed his hand-drawn concept art. If the story of Dark Souls was the skeleton and the gameplay was the soul, then the visuals were definitely the skin. That's also why players would encounter the art first, so Lucas had made sure the CG was top quality and showed it off at the expo. Classic Western European buildings, a dark fantasy style, and medieval weapons and armor, all combined, the art of Dark Souls had already struck a chord with players at the showcase. Lucas then began explaining some of the systems in Dark Souls. For example, the combat system, besides invincibility rolls, parries, backstabs, and durability, features common in many action games. Most of the team already had a rough idea of what to expect. It would just need some fine-tuning later. There would also be some unique features, like every weapon having its own special skill. And thanks to the tech level of this parallel world, Lucas could push the game's visual quality even further than in his past life. Of course, this isn't the main core of the game, but more about the finer details in the experience. Also, in the early stages, our main work will be focused on producing art assets. As for your part, Hector, I'll need you to make the game's actions stand out even more, Lucas said, looking at Hector. Hearing Lucas's words, Hector and the others nodded. Although Dark Souls isn't an action game in the traditional sense, but more of a stage-driven game, that doesn't mean action elements aren't important. On the contrary, they are actually a core part of the Dark Souls experience. In fact, any game involving action tends to have very strict requirements for how it feels. When it comes to action feedback, to put it plainly, it's all about the feeling of impact and smoothness. For example, in the famous Skyrim from the previous life, the feeling of impact was basically like swinging at thin air. As an ARPG, this didn't stop it from being great overall, but the combat experience was really not that good, bad enough that it even turned some players away. One of the most common ways to create a sense of impact, aside from using sound effects, is the so-called hit pause or hit stop. Simply put, if a weapon swing takes 60 frames from start to finish, you pause for a few frames at the moment it hits an enemy. This makes it feel like the blade is cutting into flesh. That's the sense of impact players talk about. Games like Monster Hunter, God of War, and Street Fighter were masters at doing this. But for Dark Souls, getting the right feeling of impact, without making it feel like you're hitting air, requires a lot of parameter tuning. Hit pauses don't work for every game. For example, the smooth, fast pace of Ninja Gaiden's cutting tofu style, or the long combo chains in the Devil May Cry series, aren't suited to this technique. All of this requires constant tweaking from the team. Relying on Lucas alone to handle it all personally would be unrealistic. And in the future, it's not like he's going to stop making action-oriented games. So the team needs to keep experimenting and refining. Back when they were developing Outlast, Lucas already had this in mind. During the 2 months working on Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms, Hector's team mainly worked on improving action feedback. So far, the results have been okay, but there's still plenty of room for improvement. As for the rest of the game's content, it's relatively simpler, mainly outsourcing the production of art assets. For example, in level design, the different areas in Dark Souls are all interconnected, which is fairly complex. This is a classic, seamless world design. For instance, a player might travel from Area A to Area B, only to find a small path in Area B that leads back to Area A. Later, after reaching Area C, they might discover another path that also loops back to Area A. This is actually the standard map design used in Metroidvania games. The difference is that in Dark Souls, it's not a 2D side-scroll, it's a fully 3D world. It also includes puzzle solving and exploration, which is one of Dark Souls' unique charms. In the previous life, Dark Souls III disappointed many veterans of the first game, who felt it wasn't as good, mainly because of the changes in map design. But for new players, this kind of design was actually a blessing. Even so, as Lucas explained the details of the game, Rachel, who was in charge of the maps and levels, still looked completely lost. No minimap in the game, Rachel caught on to one of Lucas's main points and asked in confusion. That's right, this way players can really appreciate the charm of the game's world. Why do more and more games shrink their UI, or even try to make it disappear completely? It's to make players feel more immersed. Think about the world of Dark Souls, it's a place full of despair. Not having a minimap helps strengthen that feeling, and the way the map is interconnected also lets players feel a sense of surprise when they discover new things, Lucas explained with a smile. Not having a minimap is one of the hallmarks of Souls-like games. Even Elden Ring, though it has a map system, still makes players collect fragments by hand, just like in Hollow Knight, a truly classic design. As for getting lost, die a few times, run around a bit, and you'll remember the way. It's all for the players. Players spend money on a game. If you don't think about how to make them feel more immersed, are you even human? Chapter 96, The Right Game. Nebula Games Office. Compared to the small team they started with, Nebula Games now had grown to a decent size. Lucas led the main development team, which included Rachel, Anna, Hector, and others. In addition, there was also an operations team for Overcooked, Legends of the Three Kingdoms, and Fall Guys, in charge of ongoing operations and content updates for these games. Nebula Games had also created a separate department for maintaining the community and the workshop. For now, most of the MOD reviews in the workshop were handled by the company's own staff and customer service team. But in the future, as more games were supported, they would have to outsource the work. By then, the in-house staff would focus on big-picture direction. Right now, they were still gaining experience from the ground up. With the start of the Dark Souls project, the whole team was working in an organized manner. Lucas didn't need to worry too much about art assets. Rachel handled communication with the outsourcing team, and Lucas only needed to give the final approval. Anna's work on the story and world-building also didn't face major issues, she just had to keep up with the game's development schedule. The real core of Dark Souls development lay in the combat system. Under Lucas's guidance, progress on this part of the game was going very well. The post-holiday hiring had brought in many new Nebula Games employees with solid experience in action games. They quickly understood what Lucas wanted and adjusted parameters using the official game engine. For boss fights, don't rely on HP sponges. Only certain weapons or conditions, like backstabs or shield parries, should give big rewards, Lucas said. The whole Dark Souls combat system is built around stamina management. Resource balance and smooth combat come before just making the hits feel heavy. On the big screen, a boss fight was playing. Since the map art assets weren't ready yet, the background was just a simple 3D wireframe. But the boss model was done. It was the first boss players would face, nicknamed the Parry Teacher, Eudex Gunda. As Lucas gave instructions, the combat system team made parameter tweaks bit by bit. While they worked, Hector used the moment to discuss some Dark Souls development matters with Lucas. Boss Lucas, for the stats, should we also make formulas for easy and normal modes? Hector asked, holding a printed file. It listed stats for all bosses, monsters, and equipment in Dark Souls. Easy and normal modes. I forgot to mention, this game won't have difficulty settings, Lucas replied with a smile. No difficulty options. Hector's eyes went wide. He glanced at the numbers in the file, then at the test footage on the side, looking completely baffled. Boss Lucas, so should we still adjust the stats later on? Hector asked cautiously. Why adjust them? The stats are already very scientific. Don't just look at the boss's numbers, you need to consider the combat system and player stats too. First, in our combat system, most enemies can be backstabbed for big damage. There's also shields and invincibility frames on rolls, all of which make it easy for players to take them down. In that case, if we don't make the monsters stronger to add some challenge, wouldn't the players be almost unbeatable? Wouldn't the game end up with no difficulty at all? Would players still find it fun then? Lucas explained seriously to Hector. Hector felt a bit dizzy listening to Lucas. It did kind of make sense. But then another problem came up. In theory, as long as players don't get hit, they're basically invincible and can take out small monsters with just a few hits. But what if the player does get hit? Looking at the nearby battle scenes still being polished, Hector fell into deep thought. So, after leaving the Dark Souls project team and returning to his office, Lucas stretched. During this time, Fall Guys was still riding high in popularity. The game had already been updated twice, adding several new maps into the rotation. Thanks to its large player base, the game also added a solo matchmaking mode and a team mode. Compared to the previous life, the team mode had improved a lot. Now the whole team could win the crown, instead of just one person in the end. In terms of sales, Fall Guys kept breaking its own records, reaching nearly 4 million copies in just under a month, and the numbers were still going strong. As for Legends of the Three Kingdoms, its numbers weren't as flashy as Fall Guys, but it had extremely loyal players. Both its daily active users and revenue were steadily climbing. Opening the system UI, Lucas looked at the golden item he had drawn earlier, with its 4 progress bars. The happiness bar had grown the most, now almost 2/3 full. Next were anger and resentment, each at about 1/6. As for sadness, it hadn't moved at all. Obviously, nobody was going to cry while playing Legends of the Three Kingdoms, or Fall Guys. As Lucas was checking the growth of these emotion points, his phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from his assistant Lisa. Boss Lucas, the official announcement for the new game competition is out. A new game competition? Lucas froze for a moment. Last year's official competition was focused on sci-fi games. That was when he made To the Moon. It won in the end, but also stirred up a lot of controversy. This year, they were announcing the competition this early. Opening the back end of the official game engine, Lucas saw an electronic notice with a red header. But this year's theme. An anti-war game, Lucas habitually rubbed his little finger. Then he glanced at the rest of the requirements. They were mostly the same as last year. The main difference was that this year's theme was noticeably more serious. After all, it was about opposing war. Looking over the requirements, Lucas began thinking about what kind of game he should make. Earlier this year there was Outlast and Overcooked, and after the new year came Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys. Originally, he had planned to wait until Dark Souls was done before applying for a higher professional title. But if he could place well in this competition, he wouldn't have to wait. Besides, during the development gap for Dark Souls, Nebula Games would also need a new game to keep its platform in the spotlight. Now the only thing left was deciding the game's direction. For an anti-war theme, he actually had quite a few options. After thinking for a moment, Lucas remembered the conditions for unlocking that golden capsule he had just gotten earlier, and came up with a game that seemed like a good fit. End of the chapter, Chapter 97, Valiant Hearts, The Great War. Lucas called Rachel into the office and first confirmed the art style for Dark Souls and the production of related assets. Then Lucas brought up the upcoming expedition event. "Are we also going to develop a game for the expedition during this time?" Rachel asked curiously. "Basically, yes. Dark Souls just needs some time to wrap up. I can handle the new game myself, but I'll need 2 people from the art team to create some assets for me. I'll take care of the rest," Lucas said. "All right," Rachel nodded. So, while Lucas was talking with Rachel, news of the expedition event had already started spreading in the gaming community. Game Division is holding another expedition event. Anti-war theme, this won't be easy. In 2 months, it'll be World Peace Day. Plus, in recent years, there's been a lot of talk in society about war-themed games promoting violence. Game Division choosing an anti-war theme this time has a bit of a political edge to it. If you ask me, that's nonsense. Some clowns just don't have anything better to do. Forget that they're all clowns. The game industry pays so much in taxes every year. We have nothing to hide. Let's talk about the expedition itself. Do you think NetDragon and Skynova will join this year? Last year, NetDragon's Swordfire Thunder took part. Probably not, haven't heard any news from them. But speaking of last year, I'm more curious about whether Lucas will take part. Last year, his To the Moon really caught us off guard. I doubt it. Isn't he working on that big PC title, Dark Souls? Yeah, for Nebula Games, that game is a huge deal. If it's a success, their platform has a good chance of becoming an exclusive hub. I don't think he'd want to split his focus. That's a relief. I just don't want to go head-to-head with Lucas again. The guy works fast, and this year's expedition has a much shorter development window. If he joins, it'd be a huge advantage for him. Many game designers in the industry were discussing the expedition. Mainly because the development period this time was much shorter. And honestly, with war-themed games, if you just want to show war, everyone knows how to do that. It's basically about showing large-scale battle scenes. As for the player's actual experience, it's all about whether it feels thrilling. But an anti-war theme is much harder. If it's not done well, instead of making players reflect on the horrors of war, it can just turn awkward. Under those circumstances, making an outstanding anti-war game is extremely difficult. So, in Nebula Games' office, Lucas was tapping away at his keyboard. On the computer screen was a design concept draft titled Valiant Hearts, The Great War. In his previous life, there had been many anti-war games. But unlike most anti-war games, Ubisoft's Valiant Hearts, The Great War was something very different. In terms of scale, Valiant Hearts, The Great War was actually quite small. It was a 2-day, sketch-style cartoon adventure puzzle game. And the characters didn't even have much dialogue. It didn't depict the brutal war scenes directly. Instead, it used a unique perspective and storytelling method to let players understand the nature of war through a side story. The game offered no bayonet charges or blood-pumping action, yet it carried the same emotional weight found in All Quiet on the Western Front and Schindler's List, an emotion that only emerges from the most tragic and terrifying of disasters. Of course, there was another reason for choosing this game. Its small scale, much like To the Moon, made it incredibly moving. It could strike right at players' emotions. After all, Dark Souls and the currently booming Legends of the Three Kingdoms and Fall Guys were not exactly the kind of games that could make players cry. Maybe when Dark Souls goes online, if players are carrying tens of thousands of souls without spending them and die once, then die again before getting them back, they might feel pretty heartbroken. Lucas sat in front of his computer, writing the game's story. 3 soldiers from different countries, a female nurse, and a dog. The whole game doesn't tell the story of war from a big-picture view. Nor does it dive deep into the core of what war really is. It simply picks a few ordinary people from within the war and tells their stories. It paints a vivid picture of the horrors of war and the heavy suffering it brings to people. So, as time passed day by day for Valiant Hearts, the Great War, Lucas had 2 of the art team members come help out. The rest he handled on his own. The progress wasn't fast or slow, but he wasn't in a hurry either. After all, there was still quite a bit of time left before the submission deadline for the competition. Besides that, the battle system for Dark Souls was basically finalized. What's left are just some small tweaks and polish, not a big problem. But the difficulty level made Hector and the other designers handling game balancing and boss levels feel a bit unsure. At first, when they heard there would be no difficulty setting, no minimap, and high enemy stats, Hector didn't have a strong sense of what that really meant. But when they actually started designing the levels and mapping out the game, things started to feel off. First of all, the level designs really were very well done. Even though the maps in Dark Souls 3 didn't have the same artistic touch as in Dark Souls 1, the individual scenes in DS3 were still way better than a lot of other games. But aside from admiring the clever design, the traps added later and how monsters were placed across the map, Hector only had one feeling: this game is full of malice. It's just not playing fair. If he had to sum it up in one line, it'd be, this world is full of danger. There are collectible items in the game. These items sparkle, practically yelling at the player, "Come get me, I'm right here waiting for you." This isn't anything special. Almost every RPG, or even non-RPG, has stuff like this. But Dark Souls isn't like those flashy attention seekers. In the world of Dark Souls, there might be a hidden monster waiting right above the item, ready to surprise you just as you bend down to grab it. Besides that, there are also monsters hiding in dark corners, behind cover, or even right around the corner waiting to jump you. And don't forget about mimics, monsters disguised as treasure chests. You run over thinking you found loot, only to get eaten alive. As for those deadly traps scattered around the levels, don't even get started on those. In fact, even early in the game, there are branching paths that lead to enemies far stronger than the regular ones, strong enough that if you haven't figured out the basics of the game yet, one hit and you're dead. And the game has this mechanic where the currency used to level up and buy stuff drops when you die. If you die again before picking it back up, it disappears for good, plus enemies respawn too. Even though it's still in the planning stage and hasn't been fully implemented, just looking at it, Hector could already imagine how it'd all play out in the final game. End of the chapter, Chapter 98, Bragging. As days passed, development on Dark Souls was going smoothly, with a large batch of art assets coming in from outsourcing. The whole team entered a fast-paced production phase. At the same time, Lucas's official blog and the Nebula Games website had started warming up the promotion for Dark Souls little by little. They were doing simple interactions with players and posting some new promotional concept art and such. Basically, it was just to remind people they're still around. But during the same period, other games were being promoted too. The ones that drew the most attention were the promotional battles between 2 of the country's top publishers and game companies, NetDragon and Skynova. Both were VR games kept under wraps, and both had also appeared at the previous gameplay convention. Even though Nebula Games had stolen the spotlight at the convention earlier, these 2 new games were going all out when it came to promotion, each trying to outdo the other. Their campaigns were big and flashy, but the impact on Nebula Games wasn't actually that serious. Mainly because both of those games were for VR platforms. Besides that, there was also the ongoing anti-war themed game competition. By now, around late July or early August, quite a few anti-war themed games had already been released on the official platform. Some were mobile games, others were PC games. The genres were all over the place: RPGs, FPS games, and more. A lot of them even copied the format Lucas used in To the Moon last year, which won him an award. But none of them really stood out. In fact, many of them got really low scores from players. And players were complaining about it online. This year's competition theme is just, I don't even know what to say. Like it's an anti-war theme, right? You need to show the brutality of war, you need big scenes, but with such a short dev cycle and no big studios involved, these games just feel super awkward. Plus one, it's like being lectured by some old guy, and the worst part, the lecture is boring as hell. Stop arguing and go check Lucas's blog. Looks like he joined the competition too. What, isn't Lucas working on Dark Souls? How did he have time to join this contest? Don't tell me Dark Souls is already finished. Who knows, but anti-war isn't an easy theme. Can Lucas really pull it off? Whatever, I'll just buy it and try it out. If it's from Lucas, it's probably not that bad. At least better than all these other anti-war games, right? Yeah, good point. As for Valiant Hearts, the Great War being released, Lucas didn't do any major promotion. He just posted a simple notice on his blog and added a short intro on the main page of the Nebula Games platform. But this was clearly different from the early days when Lucas wasn't well known and had to use clever tricks just to get some attention. Thanks to the huge success of Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms, plus the upcoming Dark Souls, Lucas had already made a name for himself and built a fanbase. Once news about Valiant Hearts, the Great War got out, players quickly noticed. But while players were excited and Lucas stayed calm, many of the other designers in the competition started to panic. What the hell, wasn't Lucas working on Dark Souls? How did he make another game on top of that? Yeah, I really thought Lucas was sitting this competition out this year. This is so damn hard. A lot of game designers were starting to feel overwhelmed. Still, there were some who tried to stay hopeful. Come on guys, maybe this one from Lucas is a flop. Right, Dark Souls has been getting a lot of promotion lately. He's probably been focused on that. After all, it's his first big project with Nebula Games. Exactly, and anti-war games are pretty deep. Lucas might not be able to pull it off. But even while saying that, just like many players, these designers downloaded and bought the game, wanting to see what it was really like. Compared to last year's To the Moon, Valiant Hearts, the Great War was priced at 20 yuan, and it was also available on both mobile and PC. On Shark TV, the hype around Fall Guys that once swept across the entire streaming platform has died down quite a bit. Even though plenty of streamers are still playing it, some even focusing exclusively on Fall Guys and Legends of the Three Kingdoms, most have gone back to their usual content. At most, when there's not much going on, they'll gather with a few familiar streamers to mess around in Fall Guys for fun and laughs. But now that Valiant Hearts, the Great War is out, it's caught the attention of a number of game streamers. In Shark TV's Luke's stream, she had just gone live and was chatting with her viewers. Alright, that's enough talking for now. Let's check out the new game from Nebula Games. It's not Dark Souls, that one's still just hype with no release in sight. The one we're playing today is part of this season's game hunt. It's called Valiant Hearts, The Great War. Judging by its size, I'd say it fits the scale of an indie game, even though Nebula Games probably doesn't count as an indie developer anymore. Inside the stream, Luke was introducing the game to her viewers. He's always followed Nebula Games pretty closely. Aside from Outlast and their first game Mirror, he also really enjoys games like Overcooked, Fall Guys, Undertale, and To the Moon. So as soon as he heard Nebula Games was releasing a new title for the game hunt, he was ready to stream it right away. As he spoke, Luke opened up the Nebula Games platform and immediately saw the game featured right on the homepage. The cover showed a soldier in uniform and a war dog. The art style was clearly cartoonish and animated. He clicked in to open the game's store page. In big bold letters was the title Valiant Hearts, The Great War. The game description read, an emotional adventure game with a unique atmosphere and art style. A mix of exploration, action, and puzzle solving. Help the characters survive the war by sneaking through enemy lines or solving challenges. The story follows 4 men and women and 1 loyal dog, whose lives become tangled together in this war. It's a tale of revenge, family, and friendship. This fictional story takes you back to famous World War I settings, reliving major battles on the Western Front and immersing you in historical events. Luke hadn't reacted much yet, but her viewers were already flooding the chat with different opinions. That description's full of hot air, huh? Yeah, I mean it's just a small cartoon-style game, and it's a side-scroller too. How's that gonna relive major battles from the Western Front? Right, the visuals don't really show the horrors of war at all. I trust Lucas, but come on, reliving WWI. I'd believe that from a big budget game, but this one. Exactly, sounds like a stretch. Even Nebula Games didn't promote it that much. After reading the description, a lot of viewers were left confused. It really did sound like over-the-top self-promotion. After all, it's just a small 2D game with cartoon graphics. How's that going to seriously portray the realities of war or relive those brutal historical battles? But Luke wasn't really focused on the description.